wire basket by town, so we don't mix up the towns. So the 4 lots that, came out of the tamper-proof container all seemed the same. I mean, there was nothing there, because we didn't know what they were tallying for at that point. They just had a tally sheet wrapped around it and secured with a rubber band. So we put those in the wire basket, brought the basket over to Team A. First lot that Team A grabbed, lot A1, was, a lot of 50, came out the same. The second lot they grabbed, when they unwrapped the tally sheet and turned to the page that had the Senate tally on it, it showed, he said there's only 21 ballots here. It says there's only 21 ballots that were counted. This feels like more than 21 ballots. At that point, they had the stack of 50 unfolded. They had unfolded the tally sheet from around it. And, the ballots, I mean, I've heard comments that people said, oh, the ballots were folded differently. We don't have any knowledge that that was the case. As I showed you before, the Long Island ballots were all folded, whether they're absentees or regular. It's not possible to determine. They would all be folded up together after the tally and the tally sheet wrapped around them. So I don't know if the counters for that team looked at it and really noted, other than I think coming across that there were a bunch of Manchester votes all together, and I do not know from my staff or myself or any of my staff. We didn't look at the ballots to see were they marked in any other way, were they marked the same. We just had the team sort them out, and so it ended up there were 9 for Breen, 29 for Manchester, 4 blanks. Normally, when you have those 3 piles, if there hadn't been any difference, normally we put the blanks on top. My staff person takes the blanks because they write the lot number on the top ballot of the lot, so that if we have a problem with the count, we can go back and find that lot and count it again if we need to. So then they just assemble those ballots back together and wrap the town tally sheet around it, and then wrap our tally sheet. No, they don't wrap ours. They just rewrap the town tally sheet, and then take our tally sheet up to the tabulation table to be added to the count.
So having had about 60 recounts with you, I know this is troubling to you. The issue of the ballots in lots, that even though they're in the wire basket, they're all segregated in the election night lots that have been done, so that they're being counted separately. We're not opening all 4 lots.
That's right. We're counting them lot by lot so that we can do a comparison between the election night count and the recount count.
And if I may, then what occurs is the ballot lots are tabulated by the counters, the recounters at the table. And in this case, you were advised that there were ballots that appeared to be in excess of what was on the tally sheet from the town election night result.
That's correct.
Did anyone, what's the process to challenge ballots in the event? Because I look through here, I see no disputed ballots. So could you walk through that so people understand it?
Generally, disputed ballots are when 2 team members cannot agree on how the ballot is marked. It's normally not used for other irregularities, other differences. Challenge ballots happen only on election night, where somebody is challenging someone's right to vote, and that ballot is marked with a number, so it can be segregated later. But there were none of those in Long Island. But the disputed ballots, I mean, there were, other than there were more ballots there than what had been tallied on election night, they don't really fall into what's a disputed ballot. So disputed ballot is when we have rules for voter intent that say, for example, if somebody merely rests their pen in the oval and makes a pen point and not a deliberate mark, that's not considered a vote. And so if they looked at a ballot and one of them said, well, I think it's a little more deliberate than a pen point, I think it's a vote for Breen, and the other one looked at it and said, no, I think it's just a pen point. The lawyers come over, they look at the rules, they try to figure out if they can agree how how it should be counted by applying one of the rules. And sometimes it is a judgment call as to how the rule applies. And in that case, if they couldn't agree, that would be denoted as a disputed ballot, set aside in a tamper-proof container until the end. And normally what happens, there'll be a handful now. There really aren't many disputed ballots because, again, the new ballot layout with ovals, people seem to understand. I mean, some people still make check marks or X's in the ovals, but we know that's voter intent according to the rules. So, it's really, it's noting it, but they're not disagreeing on how that ballot is marked. It's a difference or an irregularity that is outside of really what gets disputed.
Senator Mason and Senator Gerzofsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one was, you mentioned that your staffer came over and said, he registered a concern with you that they felt like there was a little bit more balance.
He called me over to the table and he took the tally sheet off and saw what the count was, and it was only totaling 21. He said it looks like, or feels like there's more than 21 ballots here.
Did that same person come and register that there was indeed more ballots?
We were there waiting for the count to happen, and at the end we saw what the total was.
Did either one of the representatives from your party note concern with you?
There was some discussion at the time, but these were the first ballots we had counted. They were still sorting Cumberland by the time, to get them into 50s. I don't even know if we had done any tallies yet for Cumberland. So it was a difference, but people didn't say, we all knew that it changed the numbers.
Would the counters have the opportunity to not sign the paper?
I don't think so. The way, this is their count. If they didn't agree that there were 9, 29, and 4, they would have to count them until they agreed. But this is really just recording what is the count, how something got there or whatever is sort of a little bit outside of just the pure count, which is what they're doing at that team level.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Gerzofsky.
Yes, looking at this page, it does appear, looking at this page, it does appear that it was written on the top, and I'm assuming that's one of your staff people?
Yes.
That there were 20 extra votes there.
Yeah, I don't know why he did that, and I wish he hadn't because it wasn't 20, it was 21.
Yeah.
So.
Also, where my question really goes to is that, do we find this throughout the votes at Long Island that day, where this 21 or whatever the number is, extra ballots show up in all the other races, in the gubernatorial race, in the senatorial race, the congressional race?
You will be able to see when you open those ballots that the town tally only totals 21 for that lot for every race.
So when you see that on each of the ballots, then at the end we have this mystery. Do you have any kind of idea how 21 ballots in a pile, 42 ballots in the same pile, big difference in weight? Your staff noticed that there was a difference. I would assume that the town, Long Island, would have noticed that there was a difference. Or that's another question for another person.
I think it's probably for another person. I will say it's not unusual for, if they were counting something and it didn't come out right, then they might shuffle the pile to separate them into lots just for that and count it. Because sometimes if you counted it twice and it's not coming out, you're not getting the same count for that one race, you might then sort it that way instead of doing the, straight down the ballot, 42 times.
We would assume that we would find that also in the gubernatorial election or the senatorial.
Right, mean, on the tally sheet for that lot, there were only 21 votes total, even though there were 42 ballots in that lot.
Thank you very much.
By the way, as part of the recount, I take it you are not recounting governor's race, the U.S. Senate race, other things that
That's
are
right.
happening this week. Okay.
That's right. I mean, we do, in instructing the counters beforehand, we say as a rule, you're not looking at the rest of the ballot. The only time you really are doing that is if there's a question of voter intent. So the pen point that I mentioned, I mean, we did have in another recount where somebody had just made a very small, it was a little bit bigger than a pinpoint, but they had marked every race that way, whereas we've seen others where there was just a pen point in the race we were recounting, but everything else had been filled in totally. So we're only looking at the rest of the ballot if there's voter intent to be concerned.
Okay, just so we're clear, you don't recall any difference in the folding of any of these 191 ballots that day?
I don't. I mean, I know that when they came out of the tamper-proof container, there were 4 bundles, what we call lots, that had tally sheets wrapped around them. They weren't, it wasn't ballots sitting on the top, not part of a bundle.
Okay, and with respect to the bundle of 42, what turned out to be 42, I think I heard it was 21, I take it there's no way of knowing which 21 were recorded and which 21 were extra. Is that
I
fair?
don't think there is at this point. I'm not sure how that lot was reassembled. If they did end up separating out, you know, the 9, the 8, the 4, plus the 21, then there's a total of 29 marked for Manchester, and you're not going to know which are the 21 that were counted and which are the
Right, so
which are the 8 that were counted.
there's no way of sorting that out.
I don't believe there is now. I would be surprised.
And these 42 ballots came in, and again, a lot with a tally sheet. Is there like elastic around it? How are those?
Yeah, so
Okay.
just an elastic term.
And now they're back in a pile. Do we know whether the order is the same or not? Is that they were?
We don't know. I mean, usually if they've separated it out into the 3 piles, they just, you know, stack one on top of the other, fold them back up and wrap the tally sheet back around it and put our lot number on it so we can find it.
Senator Saviello.
Let me just follow up on that. I think you answered the question, but on those other ballots, you said you didn't count the gubernatorial race and so forth. Do we know that there were other votes that were cast on those ballots?
I wasn't looking, and I know my staff person, I asked, and he said I wasn't really looking. I usually just let them do their separating, and
So if we
Tell
look
me
at
when
it
you're
later,
ready.
we will be able to see whether
it may be if the 2 people are from Team A are here that actually counted it, maybe they noticed something, but
And who is your staff? I'm sorry, excuse me.
I'm done. Thank you.
Who is your staff person assigned to this team?
his name's Howard Jones.
Thank you. So after this form was filled out, and now all 4 lots are completed, I'm going to ask what happened next, right after Senator Gerzofsky's questions.
Well, I was going to make sure, I want to make sure these are the only 3 people that counted Long Island
Yes,
from beginning to end.
yes. My staff doesn't actually count.
No,
He signs on the bottom just to make sure they have both arrived at an agreed upon count that they give to him, and then they sign.
I'm sorry, I missed 3.
That's okay.
Did these 2 counters, I'm assuming it's a Democrat and Republican,
Yes.
would they have been counting any other, like Cumberland or Yarmouth or any of the other?
When they finished Long Island, we actually counted, the only other hand count ballots were the, what we call UOCAVA, which is the Uniformed and Overseas Voters ballots. And then we had utility worker ballots that, you know, again, were issued by us, came back to us, and counted centrally. So they counted those 2 also, because they were hand count ballots. And then I think probably we were still counting Cumberland at the time, and they might have counted a couple lots of Cumberland after that. And then
We'll be able to see that in the signature.
we don't, I mean, I have all the tally sheets in my recount book, but yeah, there's other lots that Team A counted during that whole recount, and each one of them, I think the team remained the same all day. You know, sometimes somebody substitutes, somebody has to leave or whatever, and they substitute somebody. I don't recall that anybody else came in. I think it,
Well,
but for
normally,
Long Island, they were definitely the same people.
normally when we do a recount at the public safety building under your supervision, people do take breaks and people do count on multiple parts of the races. I'm just wondering if these three people did all, or these two people did all the hand counts.
Yes. Yes.
And we don't know, they might have done some of the
They
machine counts.
probably did. I mean, there were a lot of ballots, and we were counting until probably 3:30 before we finished counting all the ballots from everywhere.
Thank you very much.
Continue. We have Senator Cushing and Senator Donovan first. Am I correct that the only people who would have touched any of those ballots from Long Island would have been your representative who took them out of the box, and then the Republican and the Democrat who actually did the counting? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my staff person at the table would have unwrapped the
Right.
tally sheet and handed it to them so we might grab the stack, but he would not have touched every ballot because he wasn't actually doing the sorting for them.
Thank you. Senator Cushing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify a comment that was made by my friend from Brunswick when you indicated Democrat and Republican. More correctly, it may not be a registered Democrat or Republican, but it was somebody representing Kathy Manchester and somebody representing Kathy Breen.
That is true. I mean, that's right. Each team brings their own counters, and we don't care what their party affiliation is as long as they're the designated counters for that candidate.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Donovan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Which box has the ballots in them?
This is the Long Island box. This is our disputed ballot.
Are you 100% positive that there are 192 ballots in that box?
99.999 out to infinity, yes. I mean, that's what they arrived at. Two people on opposite sides counted those ballots that were in the lots and arrived at that count.
Thank you. So this is now done. All four lots have been counted, and
Yes.
these four sheets have been filled out.
Yes.
What happens next?
Each of those sheets, as they finish, comes up to, we have a spreadsheet program on our laptop that we enter these results into so that we can arrive at totals town by town. And so they get entered into our spreadsheet, and of course, I mean, as soon as we entered this, we knew the results for Long Island had changed. But we got the four in, and we noticed we had a total of 192 rather than 171.
Did anyone offer that day any explanation to you about why the number was different?
We did have a couple of clerks from a couple of the towns were observing, but not from Long Island. And I think, trying to remember at the time, I think we were all sort of, how can this happen type thing, but at that point, I don't believe anybody wanted to, normally we wouldn't break and look at the voting list or anything else at that point. We just try to count until the end. And again, give us an example, which has happened in other recounts. On the recount for Senate 11, Prospect had 50 more ballots than what they had tallied together for all their races. And in the recount, we discovered that there was a lot of 50 there that hadn't been tallied, and we added that to the tally. We never went to, because it didn't change the direct, it didn't change the winner of the race, it just changed the margins, so we did not, who's the candidate didn't ask to look at voting lists or anything.
Right, so the recount, we assemble all the tally sheets from all of the different precincts, if you will, in District 15, and then what happens? We just do the rest of the day.
Well, as we're doing the tally, I will mention, most of the time, the two representatives had their own system of tallying. And sometimes we'll get a town count and I'll think we're off because my count is off. And I'll check with the sides and they say, no, our tally is right. And so we'll check ours against theirs to make sure I've got all my lots accounted for. I haven't swapped, somebody didn't enter it and swap which candidate got 30 and which candidate got 10 or whatever. But normally, as we do town by town, we produce a sheet and we give it to both sides and we make sure we all agree and then we continue on, with the next town.
Okay, and after all the towns in Senate District 50, in this particular Senate District were a counter, and recount, what happened then?
We came up with a total form, and part of the problem is that when we got to Westbrook, we thought we had their local ballots. The three of the towns that used tabulators put their state and local ballots through the same tabulator, which they're allowed to do, but that means sometimes they make mistakes in sorting them out and putting them into the tamper-proof containers. They miss some. And so with Cumberland and Falmouth came out identical, so we didn't look through any of the local ballots. Cumberland, we couldn't account for all the ballots that had been counted on election night, so we opened their local ballots and we went through and tried to find any ballots that were sorted, that had never been sorted out into the tamper-proof container. We did find some ballots. When we got to Westbrook, there was another wrinkle, which is they have two Senate districts. In the 3 wards that had Senate District 25 also had Senate District 28 ballots. So we first had to go through all the boxes and separate all the District 25 from the District 28, put the District 28 aside and then count the 25s. And again, we couldn't reconcile to the exact number of ballots that had been counted on election night. So we went to the containers in the ballot room, which we thought had their local ballots, and found we didn't have their local ballots. And at this point, it was 4 o'clock, 4:15. We called Westbrook, and we had to send a trooper down to pick up their local ballots and bring them up to Augusta. So by the time we got the local ballots and went through them, I think it was 6:30. So we were still trying to get a final count before we did anything else. And at that point, there was a discussion about whether to go back and count gray again, which had changed. I don't recall being asked to look at the voting list for Long Island or to look at the unused ballots or anything else with Long Island. The focus, gray had changed. It had a 6-vote swing, and so there was a request to go back and count those. Two sides didn't agree to that. So what we ended up doing is having them sign off on a final count with the lawyer for Ms. Breen saying, I don't agree to the count.
And what was the final count? What you determined?
Through the whole district.
Yes. Long Island first and then the entire district.
Okay. So for Long Island, it was 95, 86, 11 blanks, total of 192. For the whole,
Could you clarify who those votes were?
so 95 for Breen, 86 for Manchester, 11 blanks, total of 192. Total for the whole district, at least that we arrived during the recount, was 10,916 for Breen, 10,927 for Manchester,
How many blanks did you have?
876. And there were a total of 9 disputed ballots. This is the final count sheet. In most cases, both candidates check and say they agree to the counts, and there's not enough disputed ballots. They resolve the disputed ballots and they sign off. And in this case, we had to sort of adjust the forms. So the counsel for the were not signing off on the results.
I'm sorry, I can't see that, but folks can't have back there, I suspect. There are 3 signatures. Whose are those?
First one's William Logan, who was the attorney for Ms. Manchester, and then Kate Knox for Ms. Breen, and then myself.
Okay, and you said that Ms. Breen's representative did not sign off. Her signatures
Changed
were
her, she's initialed and said,
I see.
I do not agree, I think is what it says.
Thank you. Senator Saviello.
In the other towns, when you showed us the tallies, like in Long Island, you got both signing off that they agree with the total of the team. Were all of those signed off in all the other communities?
All the tally sheets were signed off. We do realize now we should have a sign off on the town by town calculation. So when we get done, we end up with a sheet. This is the one for Chevique Island. Based on our rules, what we're going to add for the next time, again, we can only fix the next time, is to have a place for each candidate's representative or council to sign off on that town tabulation. Normally, what happens is the 3 of us all arrive at the same amount. Now, if my count is off and their count is right, I'm going to go back and find out, what did I do? Did I do a data entry error, or did we not put a lot in there? And I compare to the 2 sides. Occasionally, 2 of us agree and the other one doesn't agree, and they're coming up and we're going back through the lots to make sure. We don't usually have to count it again. But let's say that on one of the lots, on B1, that they had recorded 15 for Breen and 46 for Manchester on their own tally sheet, and it wouldn't, the total wouldn't agree with ours. And then we'd go back and we'd look at that lot and make sure it was 46 and 15, not 15 and 46.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've laid out a pretty exhaustive process here, and having been through a number of them, I can appreciate your staff does a nice job in some long hours. Would it be safe to say, Julie, that we probably had a more in-depth analysis of this vote through the recount process than may have occurred on election night?
I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. So,
Well, I mean, with the number of people who have reviewed the ballots, with the legal counsels present, I mean, is it fair to say, or accurate to say, that we have reviewed and analyzed ballots in a way that would not have been done on election night?
I mean, I certainly think in a recount, people are more attuned to the rules for voter intent, I think, sometimes than what happens. And they're looking for changes from a known number that was reported on election night. So in that sense, I think there's more discussion of it, and, you know.
Thank you.
So after your final sheet was created, I think at 6:30 or whatever it was that night, anything else happen on that day? Did anybody review any of the other materials that day beside these ballots?
We didn't. I mean, again, the request was to recount Ray, and because the numbers were different than election night, but, you know, we presume that the count that we have is correct. I mean, we don't normally go back and count again as long as the 3 of us get the same count.
Okay.
So they did not at the time, and again, it was late, and then we've been at it since 9 a.m. We could order up the pizza, and took a little break there, but, you know, by the time we get to Westbrook and finish counting, it was apparent that, you know, we were not going to get an agreed upon count where we could resolve the disputed ballots, so we agreed to do this, but we didn't. I didn't ask them if they wanted to look at anything else, but neither did they ask me, so.
Understood. So that include the events of that day?
Yes.
And you made a report, I take it, consistent with your responsibilities to someone? What happened from that point forward?
Well, the materials were put back into the ballot room and secured, and I let the state police know that this was probably going to go to a Senate committee, and a couple days, well, after the recount, it was questioned about whether, well, how many people actually were checked off as having voted, and we hadn't looked at that at the recount. And we were discussing whether there was any provision where we could go back and look at the voter list. And there is a provision in the law that says that if these recounts are going to go to a Senate committee, then the Secretary of State shall make a copy of the voter list and send it back to the town so that they can work on their voter history. So we took that opportunity to invite both sides to meet at the state police on the Monday, I think it was November 24th, to meet at the state police. We got access to the room and took the voter list, brought it out into the area. They saw that it was sealed. We opened the seal, and I went with our attorney and the state police representative, and we made a copy of the original voter list, brought it back to where the representative for Ms. Breen in Manchester were, and there was also Kathy Breen and her husband were both there. We went through and showed that the copy was a fair copy of the original. We put the original back in the original envelope, and I hadn't thought to bring any certificates to seal it with, so I took a piece of paper and we made a certificate that I signed and the two attorneys signed, and we taped it over the original and taped it back so we'd be able to see that's the condition it should be in. And we put that and locked it back up, and then they went through the copy of the list to look at and try to count how many people had voted. And so that's when they got the 171, and that included 34 people marked with an A/B that had voted by absentee ballot.
And are you satisfied, having taken a look at this, that from the time that the clerk from Long Island delivered these election materials to the state police, that from that point forward at least, that the integrity of the chain of custody has been maintained?
Absolutely.
Questions? Senator Diamond and Senator Gerzofsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Julie, who is the contact person at the Department of Public Safety that has the key when their ballots are secured?
Well, Lieutenant Scott Ireland is our contact person. I don't know how they secure the key, but we were assured when we started using the public safety building, we were assured that it's an ante-room off the floor-in room, which is the large room where we conduct the recounts, that those doors could be specially keyed with only one key, so there would be one access. I mean, when I first started here, we didn't use the state police garage. There was a lot of access there, and they put a closed-circuit camera in to monitor the ballots when we weren't there. But I mean, I feel pretty confident that, and I'm sure they can speak to that as to who has control of the key and what they do with it. But I can't go over there and just get in. I have to find somebody to get me in.
So, by the way, I know we had cameras at the old garage. Do we have cameras in this room? Closed-circuit cameras?
I don't think so. I didn't recognize it. I mean, there are some in the building, I'm sure, but
So, if we wanted to ask about that room and the procedures of that room, we would talk to Scott Ireland.
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Gerzofsky.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie, we've done hundreds, I hate to say that, we've done hundreds of these recounts. And so is your staff. We have a terrific staff that we see at every, recount after recount. Did anybody mention anything out of the ordinary except for these 21 ballots? Or except for the pile being heavier than it was supposed to be? So it's just a run-of-the-mill recount.
It pretty much was. I mean, the thing that was different about this recount is the number of ballots that were counted by tabulator, where the towns had used the same tabulator for both the state and the local ballot, because you have to separate those out, and it's possible to miss some when you're separating them. So that actually took us longer, because when the total ballots didn't agree with what the total ballots on election night, we opened those containers. So we opened Cumberland, and we opened Yarmouth, and Falmouth came out the same, so we didn't open their local containers. But, you know, it takes twice as much time, because they have the same number of local ballots, and you're just going through and sorting and making sure you didn't miss any state ballots.
We're also missing some ballots from one of the communities.
Well,
Or is that correct?
I guess I don't like to use the word missing, because all I can say is we cannot account, or we can't reconcile to the same number of ballots. And I did in my recount summary provide some of the samples similar to the email that I sent to Ms. Breen after the election and provided to the other side. There are human error in dealing with machine ballots that can affect the total number. And I'll give you an example. The clerk from Cumberland was there, and after the recount, when she heard on the press that there were missing ballots from Cumberland, she called us, she emailed us and said, I recall that at the end of the night, when we opened the write-in bin, we looked at all the ballots, and there were 2 ballots that didn't have write-ins on them. So we thought they had not been counted, and we put them through the tabulator again before we took our totals. If they're in the right-hand bin without a write-in, it means they were counted by the machine, but every once in a while, a ballot gets hung up on the feeder that tips it into either the left side of the bin or the right side. And the left side of the bin is the one that the ballot's fully counted. The right side has a write-in for a declared race. But every once in a while, like the folded absentees, they get hung up, and then the next ballot comes down and it tips into the